Can we now hear from Professor Andy Challinor, who's going to now put this in a global context. So this isn't just happening in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, of course it's happening across the world. Andy.
Thanks very much. Am I going to scare you? I've been wondering this all day, incidentally. I'm still not quite sure what's going to happen. Let's find out. So I'm going to start by asking you a question. Do any of you need convincing that this is a serious problem? Right, so I imagine that was the case. I'm going to ask you another question in a minute, which I also asked when I went to the UNFCCC to submit evidence to their advisory group, basically on adaptation and so to do with crops and climate change and things we can do and solutions we can have. And so the first thing I said to them was, is people aware there's an emergency going on? And some people looked up from their phones, and one guy went like that. And then I said, because I think this is important, then I said to them, how many of you feel it? I didn't know. How many of you feel it? Ooh. And kind of the guy who'd helped me organise the meeting went, yeah, and everyone else went, oh dear. So you've been warned now. I'm asking you, it's a serious question. How many of you feel it? Yeah. Quite a lot. Of course you do, because that's why you're here, right? So this isn't well, hopefully it'd be great if everyone thought like this, right? I think it's that's really important, which isn't what I've been asked to talk about, but I will get onto it. So sorry about that. Right, let's have a look at, have I got a slide to talk about? Yes, I have, good. So this is, it's a few years old now, but and you could say the updated evidence is probably kind of even worse. Take a little bit of explaining. We've got 2 bars for each decade. Blue is good, red is bad, dark red is worse than light red, dark blue is better than light blue. So 2010 now, in theory, see this was a few years ago, it's probably out of date, even that bar, you could probably say that. Sort of 50-50 good, bad impacts of climate change on crop yields, globally, we're looking globally now, including adaptation and various other things. I'm not going to go into the techie side of it. But from the sort of 2030s onwards, you can see the balance shifts. We've got far more yields going down than we have got yields going up, and it's getting darker red, and by the end of the century, it's kind of almost black. The other important thing about this figure, maybe if you hit space, that might become a reality. There we go. So I could have said that just as easily. Tropical regions are by and large being hit worse and temperate. And so the mostly temperate regions have got these, hang on. It's a while since I've talked about this slide. Tropical and temperate regions, sorry, in the early part of the century, and mostly temperate regions being hit, having the only positive yield increases in the second half, is what I mean. So there are some, even if you don't follow that garbled version, there are different impacts happening in different places and at different times, and that is what really is going to be what the impacts of climate change are about, not these means. So this is a global picture saying globally things are bad, but actually it's things like beginnings of things we're seeing, like food price spikes when there's a big climate event in Russia that wipes out the wheat, and as a result of that, Russia says, hold on, export ban, let's make sure we keep the wheat here. Food prices go up, this has knock-on effects elsewhere. So we actually wrote this into the UK climate change risk assessment when we wrote this a few years ago. The third cycle is underway at the moment. And I still remember that I probably won't need to look at my notes for this bit. The government response to the report that we wrote was we accept all of the conclusions, we accept the conclusions on food security of the report, with the exception of some of those on food security. In this phrase, we take a more optimistic view of the functioning of markets. And as I was reading that, yeah, but I'm not going to get political, but as I was reading that, there were, it was a salad crisis, how badly you want to think of that. But most of our salads come from, a lot of our salad comes from Murcia. There were extreme events, there were hailstorms, there were all sorts of things happening, and the supply chains weren't quite right to ensure that the supermarkets were stocked up with salads. Don't know if you remember that, a little over a year ago. And that was exactly what we were talking about in the report. So, yeah. So, winners and losers, just this story, yeah. So not a lot else to say. Well, the other thing we did in the 5th assessment report is the first evidence of observed impacts on crop yields. So attributing decreasing yield trends to climate. And actually, a more recent study I was involved in showed that crop breeding across Africa isn't keeping up with that trend of that's tending to decrease yields. So these things are now being observed, and I think being observed more quicker, certainly than I expected to. And some people I've spoken to, even sort of people who advise government and other profs and whatever, people have said to me, well, now you only need to look out of the window. And okay, I'm not putting any error bars on these statements, right? But you remember February, you remember, just thinking about here, remember February, remember Easter. I kind of feel like it's summer 2020 or something at the moment. So I think that's more or less all I wanted to say, except that just to go back to that issue, I do think it's important that we don't just understand and hold these things in our heads, that we actually feel it in some way. And I think to do that actually requires a lot of courage. And I think that's one of the really important and central things. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.